Welcome to a deep dive into something, well, truly revolutionary. You've undoubtedly heard the names Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. I mean, they're everywhere, right? Headlines, social media, maybe even conversations you've overheard. But the impact of these GLP-1 drugs, these pills and pens, goes way beyond just individual health. We are witnessing a seismic shift. It's actively reshaping entire economies, industries, and even, how we interact socially in ways we're only just starting to figure out.
That's exactly right. It's much bigger than just a medical fix for one person. Today, we're really unpacking what people are calling the Ozempic economy. And it's complicated. It's this whole web of pills, pens, and crucially, premiums. Who's paying for what some call the new skinny? And what are the knock-on effects across medicine, finance, consumer habits, our daily lives? That's what we're diving into, the system-level stuff.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this, because it is fascinating and honestly, sometimes surprising, we've gathered a really rich stack of sources. We're talking solid health policy research from places like KFF, Evernorth, plus, cutting-edge clinical insights from top journals, Nature Communications, JMA, and then there's the business side, sharp analyses from Morgan Stanley, Biopharma Dive. We've even looked at how industries like travel and fashion are already reacting.
A real mix, then.
Totally. Our mission today is clear. Pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights from all this, give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about this, era-defining innovation. We'll look at the winners, the potential losers, and definitely dig into the ethical questions, the equity issues that we just can't ignore. So what does it all mean for you? Let's really unpack this. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. For anyone who's maybe just heard the brand names floating around, what exactly are GLP-1s? What makes them such a big deal right now?
Right. So at their core, GLP-1s are glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonists, GLP-1RAs for short. Essentially, this is a class of drugs that mimics a natural hormone our bodies make called glucagon-like peptide-1. Now, this hormone, it plays a really key role in regulating both our appetite and our blood sugar. So when you take these medications, they basically hit the same receptors as your own GLP-1, and that leads to feeling fuller, your stomach empties slower, and your insulin secretion gets better.
Okay, so it's mimicking something natural. What are the main brand names we're hearing about?
The big ones are Ozempic and Wegovy. They both use the same active drug, semaglutide. Then you have Mounjaro and Zepbound, which use tirzepatide. There's also an earlier one, Saxenda, which uses liraglutide. And, while they all work on GLP-1, some, like Mounjaro and Zepbound, are actually dual agonists. They mimic another hormone, too, GIP. That dual action seems to be part of why they're so effective, particularly tirzepatide.
It feels like these just burst onto the scene, but I know that's not quite right. They've been around longer. What's the history here? What made them suddenly become this massive game changer for weight loss specifically?
That's a really crucial point, and the evolution is fascinating. These types of drugs actually go back to 2005. The first GLP-1s were approved then, but for type 2 diabetes. Their main job was helping control blood sugar, stimulating insulin, reducing glucagon. Ozempic itself, for example, got its diabetes approval back in 2017, but the first one specifically approved by the FDA for weight loss, that was Saxenda, liraglutide, that came out over 11 years ago, around 2014. And it worked, but it was a daily injection, and the weight loss was more modest, maybe 7% to 10% of body weight.
Okay, so daily shot, less dramatic results. Sounds like maybe not quite ready for prime time for mass weight loss use. What changed things so dramatically?
Precisely. This is where the game changer moment happened. And it was really two things. The newer drugs, like the weekly injections, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, they just completely transformed the game. First, obviously the convenience. Once a week versus every day. That's huge for people actually sticking with it. But second, and this is probably the bigger deal, the efficacy just took this massive leap. We're now routinely seeing average weight loss of 15 to 20% in the big trials. And with tirzepatide, sometimes even up to 25%. That level of effectiveness, plus the easier dosing, that fundamentally shifted how everyone, patients, doctors, saw these drugs.
And it's moved beyond just weight loss now too, right? I mean, beyond blood sugar control as well. I keep hearing about these other really significant benefits.
Absolutely. The scope has widened incredibly. We're seeing benefits way beyond the original targets. The SELECT trial is probably the best example. It looked at Wegovy, so semaglutide, and it showed this remarkable 20% drop in the risk of major cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, death from heart disease in people who already had heart disease and were overweight or obese. And here's the kicker. This benefit showed up even in patients who didn't lose a huge amount of weight.
Wow, okay, so the heart benefits aren't just a side effect of losing weight.
Exactly. Decoupling that cardiovascular protection from just weight loss is massive. It opens up entirely new avenues for insurance coverage, for clinical use. It's not just about pounds anymore. Plus, just recently, Zepbound got FDA approval for treating sleep apnea, another huge condition, often linked to weight, affecting millions. So yeah, the medical uses are just keep expanding for this whole class of drugs.
That's genuinely incredible. But when you have drugs causing such profound biological shifts, it makes you wonder, what else are they doing? Are there other, maybe unexpected impacts? Perhaps touching on, I don't know, our sense of pleasure or how we socialize?
That's a really critical question, and yeah, there's some fascinating stuff emerging. One really compelling area is the link between semaglutide and alcohol use. Real-world data and some early clinical trials are showing an association with a reduced risk for starting alcohol use disorder, or AUD, and also for relapsing in people who already have it. This is in people with obesity or type 2 diabetes.
Wait, hold on. From managing weight and blood sugar to potentially treating alcohol addiction, that feels like a huge jump. How does that work? What's the biology there?
Yeah, it's not just about, fewer calories from drinks. There was a randomized clinical trial that gave us some really interesting clues. Low-dose semaglutide actually reduced the amount of alcohol people drank in a lab setting significantly. They had fewer drinks per drinking day, and their weekly cravings for alcohol went down. Even more striking, taking semaglutide predicted bigger drops in heavy drinking over time compared to the placebo group. This strongly suggests it's not just metabolic, it's something happening centrally in the brain.
So it's actually affecting the brain's reward pathways. That's profound.
Exactly. And this is where it gets super interesting from a neuroscience perspective. Those GLP-1 receptors that the drugs target, they're found in key brain areas linked to reward and motivation. We're talking the VTA, the ventral tegmental area. Think of it as the brain's main reward hub, pumping out dopamine. And the nucleus accumbens critical for motivation, pleasure, the reinforcing effects of things like food, alcohol, other drugs. So the thinking is, by acting on these circuits, GLP-1s might sort of turn down the volume on the reward signal, making super tasty food or alcohol feel less compelling, less reinforcing. And interestingly, that same study also noted, almost as an aside, a significant drop in cigarettes smoked per day for some people. Hints at maybe broader effects on compulsive behaviors. But really important to stress here, these are early days. Observational data, one small clinical trial. We absolutely need more larger randomized trials before doctors start prescribing these specifically for alcohol use disorder.
Okay, caution noted. But the idea of dampening reward pathways, if it affects pleasure from food, maybe alcohol, what's the psychological side of that for people? I've heard this term anhedonia thrown around.
Yes, that's a very real experience for some users. Anhedonia, kind of a subtle but noticeable lack of pleasure or interest, particularly around food, and for some alcohol too. Now, for many people, this is actually a huge positive. They describe it as being freed from food noise. That constant internal chatter about food, the cravings, the mental energy spent resisting or planning meals. They feel liberated, finally in control.
So it's a double-edged sword then. Freedom for some, but maybe a sense of loss for others, especially if food and drink were big parts of their social life.
Exactly. While many celebrate this newfound freedom, if your main source of joy or comfort or social connection was really centered around, say, big meals, going out for drinks, that kind of thing, well, you can feel a bit adrift. Those usual rituals, meeting friends for burgers and beer, maybe they just don't hit the same way. Or you simply don't feel like participating like you used to. That can cause some unexpected friction or just a need to fundamentally rethink what brings you pleasure and how you connect with people. And there have been reports, observational ones, of increased rates of depression and anxiety in some GLP-1 users. Though, figuring out direct cause and effect there is tricky. It really pushes people and maybe us as a society to ask, how do you adapt your social life, your hobbies, when food and drink aren't the main event anymore? It might mean finding joy in different activities, different ways of connecting.
It's undeniable these drugs are medically transformative, affecting us in ways we're still figuring out. But like with any huge medical advance, the conversation inevitably hits that big wall for so many people. The cost. Expert, let's unpack the money side. Who's actually paying for these?
You've absolutely hit on maybe the single biggest issue, the engine driving this whole Ozempic economy. The sticker shock is Well, it's real. An Ozempic shot, for example, lists for around $935.77 a month. If you don't have insurance covering it, that's a massive recurring cost. It puts it completely out of reach for a lot of people without deep pockets or really good insurance. And the market size projections are just staggering. Sales of branded obesity drugs hit $6 billion in 2023. But analysts, like at Morgan Stanley, they're forecasting this to explode. We're talking a potential $100 billion market by 2030, maybe even $150 billion globally in the coming years. The sheer scale of that, it points to unprecedented demand, and it means a massive shift in where healthcare dollars and consumer dollars are going.
$150 billion. That's astronomical. What does that kind of explosion mean for the drug companies themselves? Does it just completely change their priority?
Oh, absolutely. A market that size completely reorients things. It triggers an intense race for market share, right? So huge investments pour into developing the next generation of these drugs. More effective versions, pills instead of shots, combination therapies. This kind of blockbuster potential also attracts new companies into the space, maybe leads to big mergers or partnerships. It fundamentally reshapes the competitive landscape in pharma. Suddenly, obesity isn't just a lifestyle issue, it's a primary therapeutic target, right up there with cancer or heart disease, getting that level of R&D funding.
And that cost inevitably leads us to insurance. Most Americans get health care through work.
Yeah.
How are these employer plans covering so many people dealing with this? Sounds like there's some serious tension there.
There really is. It's a major friction point. Just look at premiums. Average family premiums for employer plans went up 7% in 2024, hit nearly $26,000 a year. Employers are feeling that pressure already, and yet the demand from employees is clear. KFF found 81% of large employers, 200-plus workers, think their employees are interested in these drugs for weight loss. But there's a big gap between interest and actual coverage. Only about a quarter, 25% of those large employers covered them for weight loss in 2023, though encouragingly, 43% said they plan to in 2024. Still a big gap, though.
So even with huge employee interest, coverage is patchy. What are employers doing to try and control these costs? Are they putting up barriers?
Yeah, many are definitely trying to manage the financial hit. Often they'll cover GLP-1s only for the original indication, like type 2 diabetes, or maybe if someone has proven cardiovascular disease. For weight loss specifically, many are putting in stricter rules, like you need a really high BMI, maybe 35 or even 40 plus, to even be considered. Now, that still leaves millions eligible technically, but it cuts out a lot of people who might want or need the drug. Others use step therapy. You have to try cheaper weight loss methods first, or they put time limits on how long they'll cover it.
And then there are these things called copay accumulator programs.
Mm-hmm.
They sound kind of sneaky, like they cancel out the drug company coupons.
They absolutely do, and they're a huge hurdle for patients. About 17% of the really big companies, 500-plus employees, use these. So here's the deal. Drug makers offer coupons, right, to help patients with those high copays or deductibles. But with an accumulator program, the health plan says, nope, that coupon money doesn't count towards your deductible or your out-of-pocket maximum. So even if you use a $500 coupon, you still have to pay your full deductible or OP max out of your own pocket before the real insurance benefits kick in. It basically wipes out the benefit of the coupon for meeting your plan limits, pushing the cost right back onto the patient. It's a constant struggle, even if you have insurance.
Okay, switching gears a bit, let's talk Medicare. Huge system, millions of older adults. What's the deal there? Why has it been such a sticking point?
Medicare. Yeah, it's complicated, mainly because of a specific rule that's been around for a while. Since 2003, Medicare Part D, the part that covers prescriptions, has been legally barred from covering drugs used only for weight loss. So think about that. Almost 40% of adults 65 and older have been told they're overweight or obese. But many are explicitly denied coverage for these powerful drugs if the primary reason is just weight management. It's a legislative barrier that creates a massive gap in care for a huge group, often with lots of other health issues linked to weight.
That's a really significant chunk of the population shut out. Is anything changing? Are there talks about covering these? And if Medicare did start paying, what would that cost the system?
Yes, there are definitely active discussions. CMS, the agency running Medicare and Medicaid, is looking at changing this, especially now with the proven heart benefits. But if they do expand coverage, it comes with a hefty price tag. One analysis projected a $47.7 billion net increase in Medicare spending over 10 years, 2026 to 2035, and that's assuming only a 10% uptake by eligible people and 40% sticking with the drug. The drug cost alone could be almost $66 billion. Now, you do get some savings back from fewer heart attacks, less diabetes care, things like that, maybe $18 billion saved, but the net cost is still really high.
$47 billion net increase. That's a tough number for policymakers. It really brings up that fundamental question, doesn't it? Is healthcare just about saving money in the short term, or is it about helping people live healthier lives, even if it costs more upfront?
That is exactly the core dilemma these drugs force us to confront, ethically and economically. As one expert put it, Dr. Dhruv Kazi, a cardiologist and health economist, even if the drug prices came down a lot, they probably wouldn't be cost-saving in an absolute sense. But, he argues, the purpose of healthcare isn't to save money. We think of healthcare as something that is helping people lead healthy lives. And that's what these drugs are going to help people do. It reframes spending as an investment in people, in quality of life. And interestingly, the public seems to agree. Polls show 6 out of 10 adults across Democrats, Republicans, Independents think Medicare should cover these for weight loss. Strong support for that health-first idea.
Fascinating that it crosses party lines like that. So what about Medicaid? How are these drugs affecting spending and coverage for lower-income populations?
GLP-1s present a huge opportunity for Medicaid populations, where obesity rates are really high. Nearly 40% of adults, 26% of kids covered have obesity. And this group often faces major health disparities. And we're seeing dramatic growth already. For Ozempic in Medicaid, prescriptions and the gross spending on it basically doubled every single year between 2019 and 2023. For Wegovy and Mounjaro, the growth was even more explosive, like 12 times higher or more, just from 2022 to 2023. So states are clearly seeing the potential benefits, and patients are accessing them, driving up spending fast.
That's incredible growth. But is it clear? I mean, are those Medicaid numbers for diabetes treatment or weight loss or both? Can we tell?
That's the tricky part, and a big data gap right now. Looking at the public Medicaid data, it's really hard to separate how much of that surge is for diabetes versus obesity. Many patients might qualify for both reasons. This makes it tough for states to do precise cost-benefit calculations or to fine-tune their policies as they try to manage these ballooning costs while still serving their populations effectively.
Okay, so beyond the big insurance systems, let's zoom back in on the individual. What about affordability when people are paying out of pocket or facing those high copays we talked about? And are there other less obvious costs? You mentioned something about life insurance earlier.
Yeah, the individual struggle is very real, and it highlights major equity issues. About half, 54% of all adults who've taken these drugs said it was difficult to afford them. And for 22%, it was very difficult. And that includes people with insurance. 53% of insured users still found the cost hard to manage. It basically creates a system where your bank account determines your access.
And that life insurance point, tell me more about that. That sounds like a really serious hidden consequence.
It is, and it's something people really need to be aware of, a potential long-term financial trap. Here's how it can happen. Say a doctor wants to help you get insurance to cover a GLP-1 for weight loss. Maybe you're pre-diabetic or have risk factors. If they put down diabetes as the diagnosis on your record to get it approved, even if it's borderline, that diagnosis goes into your permanent medical history. Specifically, it lands in your MIB report, the Medical Information Bureau. Think of it like a health credit report for insurers. Once that diabetes diagnosis is in your MID file, getting life insurance later can become incredibly difficult, or the premiums could be sky high, potentially forever. It's such a risk that some doctors are actually advising patients, if they can possibly afford it, to pay cash for the GLP-1s just to avoid that permanent diabetic label on their record and protect their future insurability.
Wow. That's a huge hidden cost to consider.
Mm.
And thinking about who's most affected by all these affordability issues, are we seeing this worsen existing health gaps, particularly for groups already facing disparities?
Absolutely. And this is where the equity conversation gets really sharp. The data shows pretty clearly higher income is linked to lower rates of stopping the medication for patients with type 2 diabetes. It strongly suggests that people with more money can afford to stay on these effective treatments consistently, leading to better health outcomes over time. So these unequal access issues, the inability to afford or adhere to treatment, they risk making existing health disparities even wider. This is especially concerning for groups like the Black community, which already experiences worse health outcomes across so many diseases due to systemic issues. Unless we find ways to make coverage broader and more equitable, these amazing new drugs could end up benefiting the privileged few most, widening the health gap instead of closing it. It's a central ethical challenge of the Ozempic economy.
Okay, so you have this huge demand, Complex coverage issues, major disparities. It's almost no surprise we saw supply shortages, and that in turn fueled this really interesting, sometimes controversial world of copycat drugs from compounding pharmacies. Let's talk about those shortages and what these compounders are doing.
You're right. The demand just completely outstripped supply. It was pretty unprecedented. That led to significant ongoing shortages. Semaglutide's been on the FDA shortage list since March 2022, tirzepatide since December 2022. Now, the FDA recently said supplies are starting to stabilize a bit, but the demand is still intense, still causing bottlenecks. It's more than just weight loss driving it. It's a fundamental shift.
And during those shortages, the compounding pharmacies really stepped up, didn't they? They filled a gap for a lot of patients.
They absolutely did. For many people unable to get or afford the brand name stuff, compounders became the only option. See, when a drug is officially listed as in shortage by the FDA, the rules relax a bit. The FDA allows, even encourages, certain compounding pharmacies, especially the bigger, federally registered ones called 503B facilities, to make copies. These 503Bs have more oversight than small, local compounding pharmacies. They can make bigger batches, kind of like a backup manufacturer during a shortage. And the estimates are pretty wild. Maybe up to 2 million Americans are getting compounded semaglutide or tirzepatide. Could be, up to 30% of the semaglutide sold in the U.S., though that's a rough guess. Nobody tracks it perfectly. They basically buy the raw powder ingredient, mostly from FDA-registered plants in China, for maybe $4,000 a gram, and then mix it up into injectable solutions. They argue they're providing essential access.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, as you said. What happens if or when the FDA says, okay, the shortage is officially over? Do these compounders just have to shut down overnight?
Yes, that's exactly the issue. It's a potential cliff, a shock to the system people are worried about. The moment the FDA takes those drugs off the shortage list, those 503B compounders legally have to stop selling their copies. Immediately. Think about those potentially 2 million patients. Many rely on the compounded versions because they simply cannot afford the $900 plus brand name price. So if that cheaper supply vanishes instantly, it could trigger a huge access crisis, leaving many people scrambling or unable to continue treatment. It raises serious continuity of care questions.
That sounds like a guaranteed fight. What are the big drug companies, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, saying about these compounded versions? Are there safety issues being raised?
Oh, they're fiercely opposed. Absolutely. They argue, and they say they have testing data to back it up, that some compounded products have impurities, bacteria, incorrect dosages. They raise major safety flags. The FDA also warns consumers about the risks could be ineffective, wrong dose, contaminated, unknown ingredients, especially risky since these are injections going right under the skin.
And are they suing? Is this ending up in court?
Oh, yeah, big time. It's a massive legal battleground. Novo Nordisk alone has filed something like 132 cases against compounders. Patent infringement, trademark issues, unfair competition. They're aggressively defending their patents. The compounders, though, point to that FDA shortage loophole, arguing it allows them to operate legally for now. It's high-stakes litigation. Billions of dollars, patient access, future precedents for drug shortages. It's all on the line.
So with all these hurdles, cost, insurance, supply, legal fights, what's the future look like for just getting these drugs? Right now, they're mostly shots, need refrigeration. That seems like a hassle.
That's a huge focus for the pharma companies right now, a major area of investment. You're right, the current mainstays are mostly weekly injections, need to be kept cold. That definitely complicates things. Distribution, storage, patient convenience. Think about the cold chain logistics for vaccines, but for a chronic medication. But the good news, for patients anyway, is they are pouring money into developing oral pill versions. We're already seeing promising results in trials for pills like Eli Lilly's orforglipron and Pfizer's danuglipron.
A pill form. If that becomes widely available, what does that do to the market? Does that just open the floodgates?
It would likely be another massive shift. Could absolutely unlock a whole nother wave of potential consumers, as one analyst put it. Taking a pill is just so much easier than injections for most people. It eliminates the needle factor, simplifies adherence, makes distribution and storage vastly easier. It would probably make these drugs accessible to a much wider global audience, potentially accelerating those $150 billion market forecasts even faster. It would also likely increase competition, maybe help bring prices down eventually. It's really seen as the key to true mass market adoption.
These drugs are clearly transforming individual health and the healthcare business itself, but the ripple effects, as we've touched on, they're going everywhere, affecting industries way outside of healthcare. Let's dive into some of those wider impacts. What about just basic consumer behavior, like how much we eat as a population?
Yeah. The forecasts there are pretty eye-opening, suggesting a real macroeconomic shift. Analysts are actually predicting a definitely. The biggest challenge, the strongest headwinds, will likely be for companies focused on foods high in salt, sugar, fat, alcohol too. You know, the traditional comfort food or indulgence categories. We're already seeing data showing GLP-1 users buy fewer snacks, shift towards healthier stuff, smaller portions. They cut back on impulse buys. Fast food, casual dining, especially places heavy on pizza or sugary drinks, they're definitely watching this closely. PepsiCo CEO, for instance, acknowledged seeing a trend towards healthier snacking and smaller packs, even if they haven't seen a direct hit to their sales volumes yet. They know the consumer is changing.
That's really interesting. What about industries like travel? I could see this having a weird effect on, say, all-inclusive resorts, where food is a huge part of the deal.
You're absolutely spot on. For all-inclusives, food and drink are often a major cost. If guests start consuming significantly less, that could actually mean big savings for the resort. It might fundamentally change their business model, maybe allow them to invest more in other experiences. But it's nuanced. We're also seeing this interesting trend of grocery store tourism. People traveling, maybe eating less overall, but still wanting unique food experiences. So they seek out local supermarkets or markets to try unique local snacks as a cultural thing, rather than just piling calories at the buffet. It's shifting towards discovery.
That's such a specific behavioral shift. How about fashion?
Yeah.
Retail. I imagine people losing significant weight need entirely new wardrobes.
You are right on the money there. The rise of GLP-1s is, and I quote, upending apparel inventory planning. Retailers are seeing it clearly in the sales data. Purchases of smaller sizes, small, medium, even XXS, they're going up. While demand for large, XL is dropping. One retail analytics firm, Impact Analytics, actually predicts a 10% shift towards smaller sizes across the whole industry within just 5 years. That's huge for inventory management.
So are people rushing out to buy new clothes? Is it creating a mini boom for certain clothing types?
Absolutely. There's definitely a wardrobe refresh happening. Data shows active GLP-1 users significantly increased their spending on clothes within the first year, like up 23% for things like jeans and jackets, and a massive 50% increase for activewear sweatpants, athletic gear. People need new stuff as their bodies change. Now, this creates headaches for retailers trying to balance inventory too much large, not enough small. But it's also an opportunity. Brands are looking at flexible sizing, maybe more made-to-order options, even getting into resale to manage the influx of larger sizes hitting the secondhand market. The plus-size market specifically is seeing brands pull back a bit.
And travel more broadly. Beyond resort food, how else is it changing how or where people travel?
The potential impact on travel is just massive, really positive, actually. We're talking potentially tens of millions of people who might now feel able to do things, go places that were physically difficult or impossible before because of their weight. This is fueling a big shift towards more active vacations, more experiential travel. Adventure travel is a category seeing real growth. Think about people who avoided long flights because the seats are too tight, or couldn't manage walking tours in historic cities or strenuous hikes. Now they can. There was this really telling anecdote on a travel podcast. A woman lost 80 pounds using GLP-1s. And she said, quite emotionally, that these drugs were giving her the retirement she always wanted, enabled her to finally do things like ride a camel in Egypt, something she dreamed of but never thought possible. It's unlocking potential for a huge group of people, changing demand for travel products, marketing, even things like airline seating or tour accessibility.
The sheer breadth of these economic and social impacts is staggering. It touches almost everything. But let's bring it back to healthcare itself for a moment. There's this debate about whether these drugs actually save the healthcare system money. What's the reality there? Is it cost saving or is it something else?
It's a really important distinction because the terms get thrown around loosely. Now, it's definitely true that people carrying excess weight tend to have higher healthcare costs. Lots of related conditions, diabetes, heart disease, joint problems. Studies show losing even just 5% of body weight can save hundreds, maybe over $1,400 a year in medical costs, depending on your starting BMI. However, the GLP-1 drugs themselves, given their current price and the fact that people often need to stay on them long term, are generally not considered cost saving in the strict short-term accounting sense.
Okay, why not? if they prevent expensive conditions down the road.
Because the drug cost itself is so high, and crucially, these are generally seen as for-life therapies. If you stop taking them, the weight often comes back. Studies suggest maybe 70% of lost weight returns within the first year off the drug. So for people who stay on them, that high monthly cost adds up year after year, potentially outweighing the savings from avoided complications, at least in the near term.
So if they're not cost-saving in that direct way, how should we think about their value, given the price tag?
The better term is probably cost-effective. They achieve value not necessarily by cutting overall spending immediately, but by significantly improving health and, crucially, preventing or lessening the severity of very expensive chronic diseases over the long run. Things like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, some cancers, sleep apnea, knee replacements. That SELECT trial we keep mentioning, showing a 20% drop in heart attacks and strokes. That's preventing incredibly expensive hospital stays, long-term care. So while the upfront drug cost is steep, the long-term benefit of avoiding those major health events and improving quality of life can represent a really good value proposition for society and public health. It forces that tough question for policymakers. How do you balance the immediate budget hit from the drug cost against those future, potentially massive savings and health gains that might take years or decades to fully realize?
That's a much clearer way to frame it. Cost-effective versus cost-saving. Looking ahead then, what's the future landscape for these kinds of drugs? Is the pipeline jammed with new options? How might that change things?
Oh, the pipeline is incredibly active. Maybe one of the hottest areas in drug development right now. Experts project potentially up to 16 new anti-obesity medications could hit the market in just the next 5 years. That includes not just more oral pill options, like we discussed, making them easier to take, but also more advanced drugs, dual agonists like tirzepatide, even triple agonists hitting more hormone pathways. These could potentially offer even better weight loss or target specific complications more effectively. All this new competition, it's likely to intensify pressure on pricing, which could be good news for access, and it means more tailored options for different patients.
And I think I heard something about gene therapy for weight loss.
Yeah.
That sounds like science fiction.
It does, but it's being explored. It shows just how seriously this area is being pursued. Researchers are looking into gene therapy approaches that could potentially stimulate the body to produce more of its own GLP-1. If that ever worked, it could shift treatment from taking chronic meds to maybe a one-time or infrequent, long-lasting intervention, truly revolutionary if it pans out. And think about the broader implications. If these drugs or future versions significantly extend healthy lifespans by reducing chronic disease, that could disrupt everything in healthcare, creates new opportunities for medical tech, maybe more demand for things like heart devices as people live longer with better managed conditions. The impact on areas like kidney dialysis is less clear. Maybe fewer patients needing it due to less diabetes, but maybe those who do need it live longer. It just shows the ripple effects throughout the entire system.
Finally, with all this rapid change, the science, the demand, how are doctors and healthcare systems actually coping? It must be a huge challenge to keep up.
It absolutely is a massive challenge. The truth is, the sheer speed at which prescriptions took off kind of outpaced the development of really comprehensive support systems for patients. Many people get the prescription, but maybe not enough guidance on the crucial lifestyle changes, nutrition, exercise, mental health support that really help make the weight loss sustainable and healthy long-term. It highlights a real need for healthcare systems to adapt, to move beyond just writing the script towards a more integrated, team-based approach. Telehealth is actually playing a pretty vital role here. It helps expand access to specialists, dietitians, therapists, allows for more frequent check-ins and support, reaching people wherever they are. It's helping to bridge that gap, providing more holistic care for obesity as the complex metabolic disease it is.
We have covered so much ground today, a real deep dive into the huge impact of these GLP-1 drugs, from their medical evolution, the really complicated pricing and insurance mess, to how they're shaking up the economy, different industries, and individual lives. It's crystal clear these aren't just changing waistlines. They are fundamentally reshaping industries and forcing us to ask some really big questions about access, about fairness, about what we value as a society.
And it's definitely not a finished story. This is unfolding right now incredibly fast. New science is coming out constantly. The policy debates about who pays and how are only getting louder. Markets are adapting continuously. Food, fashion, travel, you name it. This whole Ozempic economy is just such a powerful example of how one big innovation can send transformative waves through absolutely everything else. It changes how we live, how we interact, how our economy works.
So as these GLP-1s become more common, as millions potentially achieve this new skinny, what does that really mean for our future collectively?
How do we as a society balance that individual desire for health, for weight management, against the huge collective cost? And how do we avoid making existing health inequalities even worse? Maybe the most crucial question, how can we make sure this medical revolution actually benefits everyone, not just those who can afford the pills, the pens, and the premiums? Something to think about: how does this impact the choices you make and the world you see around you?